All right, we're going to try to do this as a two-hander rather than a monologue. I always wanted to do videos talking to other people, by the way, talking with other people. Like, even if it's mostly me talking about the topic, I really think there's a kind of unwanted intensity to me staring straight into that camera and saying, give me your soul. You know what I mean? Like, especially, so many topics. I really think it's better if I'm talking to my girlfriend and, I'm checking, like, you understand what I'm saying? She can jump in any time. Maybe she has nothing to say on the topic. I think it's a lot more human to see that kind of interaction. Maybe especially when you're talking about politically important issues or philosophically dense and difficult issues. I got one piece of fan mail for the last video we did talking about vegan politics. Said vegan politics on the thumbnail. A guy wrote in, but he said what a contrast it was to these other channels. There aren't that many where it's a couple, but the couple work from a script and they sit there and stare into the camera. So it's not even like two people having a conversation, right? It's two people sitting there in tandem, in parallel, staring into the camera and having a totally artificial way of talking.
Like, yeah, what do you think about that, Isel?
That's a good question. That reminds me, But
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And now here's the next line on my script, So anyway, I just say, I dig that. But I mean, some people also write in and complain like I'm preventing you from talking. You can say anything you want to say. You can jump in any time. But anyway, some of these topics, like some of the topic is like my life or it's me complaining about my university education. Obviously you're not going to say. So look, one of the words I see thrown around, a lot of what goes on in vegan politics right now, people kind of trying to bully each other into activism. Like you ought to feel bad about yourself because you're not as much as an activist as somebody else.
It's like the John Sakar's video.
Oh, that's a good. I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
No, that's a great example.
Are you going to the protest on Sunday?
Right.
It's like, oh no.
Yeah. Oh no, I'd rather watch Game of Thrones. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So no, that's a relatively polite and direct view, but I think a lot of the political discourse, it's people trying to inflate their own egos, their own sense of self-importance. That's understandable. But also people trying to kind of insult and diminish each other, like you're not a real activist or you're not doing all you can for the movement and so on. Anyway, some of that's inevitable. Like if you work in the fashion industry, the same thing goes on to some extent. Like you're not a real fashion designer. Mm-hmm. You're not really committed to the fashion the way I am. That stuff goes on, So in theater and fashion, all kinds of some of that. But I mean, guys, we got to keep it under control. And in this game of people bullying each other, I see the word dogma being kicked around in a peculiar way. Now, I want to kick this off by saying, let's really think about the difference between the word dogma and the word axiom. I think in general, when we want to be flattering, we say that things are axiomatic. And when we want to insult them, we say that they are dogmatic. My dictionary definition of axiom is a statement or proposition that is regarded as being established, accepted, or self-evidently true. So, what is the difference between a dogma or an axiom? What's the difference between a government and a regime? A lot of these things work that way. Oh, you going to look something else? Oh, you want to look up dogma by contrast?
Yeah.
Go on. Cool. See? She can interrupt anytime she wants. So dogma by contrast is defined as a principle or set of principles laid down by an authority as incontrovertibly true. Right. But fundamentally, when we're talking about dogmas or axioms, we're basically talking about one belief that is required by another set of assumptions. If we do not believe A, then how can we believe B or do B, C, and D? Something else follows from it. John McDougall, the diet guru, he puts forward the idea that is, I think, dogmatic, or if you want to flatter it, you can say axiomatic. He puts forward the idea that there is such a thing as a human diet. In the same way that we can talk about. Have you heard him say this? He said it in different contexts.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
In the same way that there's a
right.
diet for...
hippos.
Yeah.
So if you've got a hippo... right. Well, no, but it's more specific because it's species specific, right? So his point is if you're keeping a hippo in captivity, you have to know what is a hippo diet. You have to have the appropriate food for a hippopotamus. If you're keeping some kind of monkey in captivity, scientifically we can study what is a human diet in the same way that we can study and establish other species diet. Yeah. And then, as you know, his conclusion is that appropriate human diet, the human diet, is starch based. So it's vegan, but specifically, he has a lot of other specific diet. Now that is, an axiomatic mode of reasoning. That is dogmatic. I'm comfortable with it, but you don't actually discredit what he's saying by calling it a dogma or by saying that this is dogmatic reasoning. unnatural vegan and many vegans who are influenced by Peter Singer have an approach. Peter Singer's form of so-called utilitarianism, they have a dogma of thinking about veganism in terms of suffering, you know? And I don't. I had a supporter on Patreon asking me about that. I had a supporter on Patreon asking me in an exasperated way, how is it possible that you support veganism, but you're not trying to minimize the amount of animal suffering, that I don't think in this way, with suffering being the crucial concept. Yeah. And I had a couple messages back and forth with him, but the last message I said to him, look, you need to really accept that it's not the case like I secretly agree with you and I'm just confused about it or I don't want to admit it myself. I really profoundly disagree with you. Now, suffering, I'm not saying it's a concept of no importance at all to me. But for one thing, different people define suffering in different ways. But, to me, suffering is much less important than the idea of dignity. I don't think I'm trying to achieve zero animal suffering on the planet, which is actually what some vegans would say. They want to reduce or eliminate animal suffering. And this comes up whenever we talk about wild animals. You talk about releasing animals into the wild, and people say, well, but they'll die. And I say back, guess what? The mortality rate for animals in the wild is 100%.
Yeah.
It's not that some of them will die. All of them will die. But they'll get to have a life in the wild before they die. Like talking about releasing rabbits in the wild.
Yeah, a dignified life.
What do you think the mortality rate is for animals in captivity?
Yeah.
I'll give you a hint. It's 100%, but they live their whole life in a cage. So yeah, if you're talking about rabbits, are these rabbits going to be happier in the wild or in your home, in a hutch, in a cage? My answer is not about happiness. It's not about suffering. It's about dignity. And a lot of time that's with human dignity also. So like when we were talking about eating roadkill or something, we were talking about eating eggs from backyard hens or something. I think it's actually beneath my dignity to eat chicken eggs. Regardless, even if it's the happiest chicken in the world, it's a free-range chicken and meats all this thing. I actually think there's a question about my human dignity in eating that. And again, not if I'm abandoned on a desert island or in some extreme survival situation. Yeah. But so for me, dignity is a really important concept. Suffering, not so much. I have a different approach. But it is dogmatic reasoning, the approach of Unnatural Vegan. I would say the approach of everyone who imitates Peter Singer, consciously or unconsciously, of saying this is the value of suffering, this is how we can quantify it. Peter Singer has quite a number of other dogmas or axioms. He has a lot of axiomatic reasoning about so-called cognitivism, that he thinks he can define what intelligence is and isn't, and then he defines suffering as related to consciousness, etc., etc., etc. So this is dogmatic, this is axiomatic. And people like Unnatural Vegan are really wrong to say that they can kind of divide the world of vegan politics into good and evil, where good is pragmatic and evil is dogmatic, or evil is axiomatic. Yeah. Some things we can reason through in an axiomatic way, and some we can't. So we were watching Vegan Gains. Vegan Gains had a video about a guy who really sincerely does not understand the theory of gravity and does not understand how the world can be a sphere. He's into flat earth reasoning and so on. Yeah. And it's pathetic, and it's very easy to insult this guy as an idiot because he believes in a flat earth and so on. But on the other hand, I can see that the education system has kind of failed to move past dogma and axiom. We can teach how gravity works as a simple dogma, as a simple axiom, and maybe some people are going to get it, and some people aren't. So anyway, but axiomatic reasoning is useful in some ways and not in others. So look, I put this out there. My own dogma, I have mentioned this in one other YouTube video. If I were to actually state my engagement with veganism as a dogma, it is the following. I even wrote this down before making this video. I normally write nothing down. My own dogma is, if more and more people refuse to buy animal products, the world would be a better place. Okay? If thousands of more people refuse to buy animal products, if millions of more people refuse to buy, whatever the number is, if we can have increasing numbers of more and more. And that dogma is phrased in that way because it's not specific to health. It's not specific to ecology. It's not specific to some utilitarian notion of total animal suffering, or pleasure versus pain, or anything else like that, right? I ask you, is this inherently flawed because it's dogmatic? I can say to you sincerely, I believe in this dogmatically. This is an axiom or this is a dogma I believe in. I think you can find fault with it, or you can say it fails to address the same thing that Dr. John McDougall's dogma addresses, or fails to address the same things that utilitarian dogma. But one of the first videos on my channel, I talked about the meaning of the word ideology. that ideology had become a bad word, that we're all supposed to pretend we don't have ideology, we don't know what ideology is. Said, look, let's stop treating ideology as a dirty word. Let's admit to ourselves that if we're serious about politics, we do deal with ideology, with questions of ideology, with questions of ideals and idealism also, which is related but different from ideology. Yeah. I feel we got to kind of move past this thing with dogma and axioms, and we can just acknowledge in an open and honest way, dogmatism is an aspect of veganism. Some elements of veganism are dogmatic. Doesn't mean they have to be ridiculous. Doesn't mean we're going to disintegrate into some kind of oppressive Catholic monarchy from the 14th century. It really doesn't mean any of those things. And I think the more honest with ourselves we can be about the role of dogma in our own beliefs, then in a meaningful sense, the more pragmatic we will be in dealing with politics. That's a wrap. And it's not that I didn't let her get a word in edgewise. I promise you.
I had not read what you had written down. That was totally new to me. So it was interesting. Yeah.
She's a viewer and
yeah, I first started watching your channel, so it's I like to digest what you say.
That's right.
And
so
then respond.
I mean, there was a time when you watched me on YouTube from afar. We met via YouTube, and now you just watch at a much closer proximity, live streaming, face to face.